A casino security thug insults and kicks out a quiet martial arts teacher for defending an elderly Korean War veteran, mocking both men with racist slurs and brutal violence. The bully thinks he's just removed another troublemaker from his precious casino floor. But what the arrogant enforcer doesn't realize is that this humble instructor teaching senior citizens in a strip mall is actually Donnie Yen himself. The security chief has no idea. He just humiliated a living legend who spent decades perfecting the deadliest fighting system on Earth. While the thug brags about his MMA training and threatens the confused veteran, the martial arts master calculates every angle, every weakness, every mistake his opponent is making. The casino cameras are rolling, thinking they're capturing a simple assault, but they're actually recording the moment a small-time bully discovers why some legends choose to stay hidden. The veteran recognizes his defender's fluid movements and steps back, knowing that 40 years of Wing Chun mastery is about to be unleashed. What happens when you pick a fight with the wrong quiet teacher? Can casino muscle survive a lesson in real martial arts? What happened next would terrorize the security team for the rest of their pathetic careers. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wooden dummy stood silent in the pre-dawn darkness, waiting for its daily conversation with calloused fists and calculated precision. David Chen flicked on the lights of his modest Wing Chun school, the fluorescent bulbs revealing a space that spoke of dedication rather than profit. Faded photographs of Bruce Lee and Ip Man watched over carefully maintained equipment, worn but spotless, like everything else in David's world. A T-55. David moved through his morning routine with the fluid grace of water finding its path. Each adjustment of the training equipment was deliberate, purposeful. The wooden dummy received a gentle pat, an old friend greeting before their daily dance. He checked the mirror angles, ensuring his students could see every subtle movement of the forms they struggled to master. His first class arrived at 7 sharp. 8 students, all over 60, each carrying the particular dignity that comes from surviving life's battles. Helen Martinez entered first, her silver-streaked hair pulled back practically, brown eyes bright with determination despite her 64 years. Behind her came Walter Kim, a retired mechanic whose arthritic hands had found new purpose in Wing Chun's gentle strengthening exercises. "Good morning, Sifu," Helen said, using the respectful title that David had never demanded but somehow naturally received. David nodded warmly. "Morning, Helen. How's Bobby doing with those bullies?" Her expression darkened slightly. "Still having trouble at school. That boy needs to learn to stand up for himself. Bring him by after school," David said quietly, already moving toward the center of the practice area. Sometimes the best defense is simply understanding you have options. The class flowed like meditation in motion. David's voice remained soft, patient, as he guided his students through the Sil Nim Tao form, the little idea that contained the foundation of everything. His own movements were economical, precise, each gesture holding decades of refinement. When Mrs. Peterson struggled with the elbow position, David's gentle correction felt more like a dance partner's guidance than instruction. "Remember," he said, his voice carrying the weight of ancient wisdom, "Wing Chun is not about force. It's about understanding. The center line, the angles, the flow of energy. These are natural laws, not fighting techniques." Walter chuckled, throwing a mock punch that David redirected with barely perceptible movement. "You make it look like breathing, Sifu." David smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious features. "When you've been breathing as long as I have, Walter, everything becomes natural." As the class wound down, the students lingered, as they always did, reluctant to return to a world that moved too fast and respected too little. David cleaned each piece of equipment methodically, the ritual as important as the training itself. Jerry Peterson, his landlord, knocked on the door frame, a gruff man in his 70s who'd grown fond of his unusual tenant. "Rent day, David," Jerry announced, but his tone held affection rather than business. David handed over the cash without ceremony. Jerry had long since stopped asking questions about the quiet teacher who paid in crisp bills and never caused trouble. Some mysteries were better left unsolved. especially when they involved reliable tenants who improved the neighborhood simply by existing. After Jerry left, David stood alone in his school, surveying the space that had become his sanctuary. Outside, Henderson, Nevada, bustled with the controlled chaos of suburban life. Inside, time moved differently, governed by breath and balance rather than clocks and deadlines that Helen's grandson Bobby would arrive soon. Another young soul needing to understand that true strength came from within. David adjusted the wooden dummy one final time, preparing for the evening's second lesson, this one about dignity rather than technique. The Honda Civic's engine hummed quietly as David navigated the transition from Henderson's suburban streets to Las Vegas boulevards. Neon-soaked excess. The contrast always struck him, the honest simplicity of his neighborhood dissolving into the calculated glamour designed to separate people from their money and their judgment. The Emerald Palace Casino rose before him like a gaudy temple too. Artificial fortune, its green-tinted glass and gold trim catching the desert sunset. David had been coming here every Friday for 3 years, drawn not by gambling's thrill, but by poker's mathematical precision. Numbers didn't lie, percentages were honest, and human nature was predictably readable across the felt that he parked in. The same section each time, walked the same route through the casino's calculated maze, his movements unhurried despite the chaos surrounding him. Slot machines chimed their electronic siren songs while elderly patrons fed them with mechanical devotion. David observed everything. Security camera positions that had become second nature, guard rotations he could predict to the minute, the subtle tells that distinguished professional dealers from temporary help. The poker room occupied a corner of the main floor, separated from the slot's cacophony by sound-dampening panels and elevated slightly to provide both prestige and security oversight. David approached Table 7, where familiar faces welcomed him with nods of recognition. "Evening, Professor," called Maria Santos, the dealer whose Wednesday shifts had taught her to appreciate David's quiet competence. She was 40-something, professional, and had learned that David's modest tips came with genuine respect, a rarity in her world. David settled into his customary seat, back to the wall, clear sightlines to all entrances. Old habits, he told himself, though he'd never quite identified where those habits originated. His one good suit, navy blue, well-maintained but not expensive, helped him blend among the casual players while avoiding the high-roller attention that came with obvious wealth. The game began with the familiar ritual of shuffling, dealing, betting. David's approach was scientific. Calculate the odds, read the opponents, manage the bankroll. He won modestly but consistently, never enough to attract attention, always enough to cover his evening's entertainment with a small profit. "You ever lose, Professor?" asked Janet Walsh, a retiree from Phoenix who visited monthly with her casino club. "Everyone loses eventually," David replied, studying his cards with practiced neutrality. "The question is whether you learn from it." His peripheral vision caught movement near the blackjack tables, security guards clustering around someone, voices rising despite efforts to keep the situation quiet. David had learned to notice disturbances, another unexplained instinct that served him well in environments where tension could escalate quickly. The player across from him, a young man with more confidence than skill, was bluffing badly. David called, revealing cards that made the mathematical superiority obvious. As he collected the modest pot, the disturbance at blackjack grew louder. "Some old guy causing trouble," whispered Tom Bradley, a regular whose construction background made him notice building maintenance issues and security situations with equal attention. David's eyes moved toward the commotion without turning his head. An elderly man in a military cap stood surrounded by casino security, his posture proud despite obvious confusion. The man's bearing spoke of military service, the kind of dignity that came from surviving battles that mattered. "Probably just confused," Maria said quietly, dealing the next hand. "Happens more than you'd think with the older folks." But David noticed something else. The security guard's body language was aggressive rather than helpful, confrontational, rather than concerned. The elderly man wasn't causing trouble. Trouble was being caused for him. David folded his next hand without looking at the cards, his attention drawn by something he couldn't quite identify. The old man's military bearing reminded him of instructors from his past, men who'd earned respect through service rather than demanding it through position. The situation at blackjack escalated further, voices carrying across the poker room despite the sound dampening. David cashed out his modest winnings, $127, typical for his Friday evenings, and prepared to leave. But something made him pause, car keys in hand, watching as the elderly veteran faced down security guards young enough to be his grandsons. The man's confusion was real, but so was his dignity. And David had learned long ago that dignity under assault demanded response, regardless of the personal cost. The blackjack area buzzed with uncomfortable tension. As David approached, his footsteps silent despite the casino's hard flooring. Years of martial arts training had taught him to move without disturbing the air around him, a skill that served him well in situations requiring careful observation. Frank Kowalski stood with military bearing despite his 78 years. The Korean War veteran's cap sitting precisely on silver hair that had once been regulation short. His weathered hands showed the slight tremor of age, but his blue eyes remained sharp, alert, taking in everything despite the confusion clouding his features. .3 security guards loomed around Frank like predators circling wounded prey. The largest wore a name tag reading Morrison. A man whose shaved head and multiple tattoos suggested he'd found employment that suited his particular temperament. His cold gray eyes held the calculating cruelty of someone who enjoyed having power over others. "I've been playing here for 20 years, Frank was saying, his voice carrying the firm cadence of someone accustomed to being heard and respected. "I don't count cards. I don't even understand how someone my age could keep track of." "Save it, old man," Morrison interrupted, his tone deliberately condescending. "We've got you on camera." The pit boss saw the whole thing. "You were tracking the tens and face cards like a pro." David paused at the edge of the gathering crowd, assessing the situation with practiced eyes. Frank's confusion appeared genuine, the kind of overwhelming bewilderment that came from being falsely accused of something beyond one's capabilities. The veteran's wedding ring caught the casino's artificial light, a worn band that spoke of decades of faithful marriage. In his shirt pocket, the corner of a photograph was visible, likely his late wife, carried everywhere as a talisman against loneliness. Morrison stepped closer to Frank, using his considerable size to intimidate. "Maybe you think being old gives you some kind of pass? Think we won't call the cops because you're wearing that little hat?" The insult landed like a physical blow. Frank's military bearing stiffened, pride warring with confusion as younger men mocked the service that had defined his character for over half a century. Victoria Sterling materialized beside Morrison with the smooth efficiency of someone accustomed to managing crises. At 45, she moved through her domain with predatory grace, platinum hair, an expensive suit broadcasting her authority. Her cold blue eyes assessed Frank with the calculation of someone who saw people as profit margins rather than human beings. "Sir, we're going to have to ask you to come with us," Sterling said, her voice professionally pleasant while carrying unmistakable threat. "We have protocols for situations like this." Frank looked around desperately, seeking support from the crowd of onlookers who studiously avoided eye contact. The casino's bright lights and electronic noise created a surreal backdrop for his humiliation, neon and chrome witnessing the systematic destruction of an old man's dignity. "I don't understand what's happening," Frank said, his voice beginning to shake. "I was just playing blackjack, the same way I always do. I lost $40. How is that counting cards?" Morrison laughed, the sound containing genuine cruelty. $40? Right. What about the 300 you were up before that? Coincidence, I guess. David felt something shift inside his chest, a familiar sensation he'd learned to recognize. As the moment when action became inevitable, the elderly veteran's confusion was genuine, his dignity under systematic assault by people who should have been protecting rather than predating. Frank stumbled backward, overwhelmed by accusations he couldn't comprehend and surrounded by people who seemed determined to destroy him for reasons he couldn't fathom. Other casino patrons watched uncomfortably but maintained their distance, unwilling to involve themselves in someone else's catastrophe. That's when David stepped forward, extending a steady hand toward Frank's elbow. His movement was gentle, supportive, but it immediately changed the dynamic of the confrontation. "Sir," David said quietly, his voice carrying calm authority that cut through the chaos. Perhaps you'd like to sit down for a moment? Frank looked up at David with desperate gratitude, seeing kindness in a place where cruelty had suddenly become the dominant language. Morrison's attention shifted to this new player, his predator's instincts recognizing potential interference with his sport. You got a problem, friend? Morrison asked, the false friendliness in his voice carrying clear warning. David met Morrison's eyes steadily, his expression remaining calm while something subtle shifted in his posture, a balance that suggested coiled strength despite his unassuming appearance. Morrison stepped closer to David, using his imposing physique as an instrument of intimidation. At 6'3" and heavily muscled from years of mixed martial arts training, he was accustomed to people backing down when faced with his aggressive presence. His MMA tattoos told stories of victories in cages where violence was entertainment, and his cold eyes suggested he'd brought that mentality into his security work. You deaf? Morrison sneered, deliberately invading David's personal space. I said move along, Bruce Lee. The racist comment hung in the casino's recycled air like poison gas. Several nearby patrons shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the ugliness, but unwilling to confront it. Frank looked up at David with growing recognition, something familiar about the quiet man's bearing. The way he held himself with unshakable calm despite facing obvious hostility. David remained perfectly still, his breathing controlled, his expression neutral. Years of training had taught him that anger was a luxury he couldn't afford, emotion, a weakness that could be exploited by opponents who mistook patience for fear. There's no need for this to escalate, David said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard without raising his volume. This gentleman seems confused. Perhaps if we could perhaps you could mind. Your own damn business, Morrison interrupted, his voice rising to attract more attention. This is casino security business, not some kung fu movie bullshit. Victoria Sterling watched the interaction with calculating eyes, recognizing that David's calm intervention could defuse a situation she preferred to exploit. Frank's humiliation served her purposes, visible punishment for anyone who might challenge the casino's methods, regardless of whether those challenges were real or imagined. Sir, Sterling said to David, her professional smile as artificial as the casino's cheerful lighting. I appreciate your concern, but we have trained security personnel handling this situation. For everyone's safety, I'm going to have to ask you to return to your gaming. David helped Frank to a nearby chair, the elderly veteran's confusion evident as he struggled to process accusations that made no sense to his honest mind. Frank's military bearing remained intact despite his bewilderment, decades of service having taught him to maintain dignity even when facing incomprehensible circumstances. They've been doing this to other veterans too, Frank whispered to David, his voice barely audible above the casino's electronic symphony. The comment was quiet, almost lost in the ambient noise, but David's trained hearing caught every word. The implication hit David like a physical blow. This wasn't an isolated incident of confusion or miscommunication. This was systematic predation targeting people who'd served their country and deserved respect rather than exploitation. Morrison moved to separate David from Frank, his approach deliberately aggressive. I said move along before you cause trouble too. This old man's got questions to answer, and you're interfering with official business. Official business? David asked, his tone remaining calm while his eyes assessed Morrison's stance, balance, and obvious tells. What exactly is he accused of? Card counting, cheating, theft by deception. Morrison rattled off the charges with practiced ease. We've got him on camera, we've got witness statements, and we've got about 30 seconds before I decide you're part of the problem. David met Morrison's stare steadily, something shifting almost imperceptibly in his posture. His weight settled, more evenly on both feet, his hands relaxed at his sides in a position that appeared casual but allowed for instant response. Frank watched this subtle transformation with growing recognition, military experience recognizing the signs of someone preparing for combat while hoping to avoid it. I'm just suggesting, David said quietly, that treating a veteran with basic respect might serve everyone's interests better than public humiliation. Morrison's laugh contained genuine malice. Veteran? Right. Probably bought that hat at a thrift store. These old guys come in here all the time. trying to get sympathy for their sob stories while they rob us blind. The insult to military service crossed a line David hadn't realized existed until Morrison stepped over it. Something in David's expression changed, not anger, but the kind of cold calculation that came from decades of training in situations where miscalculation meant death. Frank saw the change and whispered urgently, "Don't let them provoke you. They want an excuse to make this worse." But Morrison was past caring about excuses, his predator's instincts aroused by David's refusal to be intimidated. He gestured dismissively at both men, already planning how to escalate the situation to justify whatever level of force he felt like applying. "Now, old man," Morrison said, turning back to Frank with renewed aggression, "you're going to tell me exactly how you were cheating, or we're calling the cops, and you can explain it to them." Frank struggled to stand, his dignity under final assault, and David realized that peaceful resolution was no longer possible. That Frank's attempt to stand became a study in human dignity under assault. His legs, betraying him at the moment he most needed strength, wavered beneath the weight of false accusations and systematic humiliation. David moved instinctively to steady him, one hand gently supporting the veteran's elbow while his eyes never left Morrison's face. Morrison interpreted David's assistance as defiance of his authority, his predator's brain unable to distinguish between compassion and challenge. The security chief's massive frame tensed, muscles coiled beneath his expensive suit like a spring wound too tightly. "I told you to back off," Morrison snarled, roughly grabbing David's shoulder with enough force to stagger an ordinary man. "You want to be a hero? Let's see how heroic you feel in County Lookup." David's body responded before his mind could intervene, muscle memory from decades of training automatically shifting him into a defensive stance so subtle that only someone with extensive martial arts experience would recognize it. His feet found perfect balance, his center of gravity lowered imperceptibly, his shoulders relaxed while maintaining readiness for explosive movement. "There's no need for this to become physical," David said quietly, his voice carrying a new undertone that made even Sterling take an unconscious step backward. The mild-mannered poker player was disappearing, replaced by something far more dangerous. Morrison laughed, the sound echoing across the casino floor like breaking glass. "Physical? You think this is physical?" He flexed his considerable arms, tattoos rippling across muscles built through years of cage fighting and steroid enhancement. "I've been crushing tough guys since before you learned to use chopsticks, Jackie Chan." The racial slur landed like acid on David's patience, but his expression remained controlled, almost meditative. Frank watched with growing recognition, military experience finally placing the familiar elements he'd been sensing. The perfect balance, the economical movements, the way David's presence seemed to expand despite his modest physical stature. "Maybe we should call security," suggested a nervous patron, apparently unaware that security was the problem. "I am security," Morrison boasted, his voice rising to address the growing crowd. "This is what happens when people think they can interfere with casino business. You want to learn some respect, Bruce Lee?" Victoria Sterling sensed the situation spiraling beyond her control, but her calculating mind saw opportunity in chaos. A public confrontation would justify whatever level of response Morrison chose to apply, and any resulting lawsuit could be managed through her network of corrupt legal contacts. "Mr. Morrison is simply doing his job," Sterling announced to the gathered spectators, her voice carrying across the gaming floor. "Sometimes people don't understand that casinos have to protect themselves from cheaters and troublemakers." David's breathing remained perfectly controlled, each inhalation and exhalation measured and purposeful. His hands stayed relaxed at his sides, but Frank noticed how his fingers had subtly positioned themselves, not clenched into fists, but aligned in a way that suggested devastating precision if violence became unavoidable. "Last chance," Morrison warned, his ego now committed to a course that his experience should have warned him against. "Walk away now, or I'll make you crawl away." Frank struggled against the chair's confines, his military pride refusing to let him remain passive while someone defended his honor. "Please," he whispered to David, "don't let them destroy your life for me. I'm not worth it." David glanced down at the elderly veteran, seeing not confusion but clarity in Frank's blue eyes. The old soldier understood exactly what was happening and was willing to sacrifice his own dignity to protect someone who'd shown him kindness. That moment of recognition, a fellow warrior's willingness to accept defeat to protect others, sealed Morrison's fate. "You shouldn't have grabbed me," David said quietly, his voice carrying the finality of a death sentence. "But threatening him was your real mistake." Morrison lunged forward, confident in his size and training, completely unaware that he was about to discover the difference between knowing how to fight and mastering the art of war. Morrison's massive hand shot toward David's throat with the confidence of someone who'd ended fights with intimidation alone. His MMA training had taught him to overwhelm opponents through aggressive opening moves, using his size and strength to establish dominance before technique became relevant. David's response was water flowing around stone. The security chief's grab found empty air as David shifted imperceptibly to the left, his movement so economical that observers barely registered the evasion. Morrison's momentum carried him forward into nothing, his balance compromised by the expectation of contact that never came. "There's still time to stop this," David said quietly, his voice carrying the patience of someone who'd given his opponent every possible chance to choose wisdom over violence. Morrison's face flushed with embarrassment and rage. The crowd of casino patrons had grown, their cameras' phones emerging like electronic witnesses to what they expected would be a security guard asserting his authority over an uncooperative customer. Instead, they were watching a masterclass in restraint. "You think you're fast?" Morrison snarled, his professional composure completely abandoned. "Let me show you what fast looks like." His second attack came with genuine malice, a haymaker punch designed to end the confrontation through overwhelming force. Morrison had used this combination successfully in dozens of previous altercations, his size and aggression usually sufficient to cow opponents into submission. But David's block was a thing of beauty. His left hand rose to meet Morrison's incoming fist, but instead of opposing force with force, David's technique redirected the punch's energy while simultaneously striking Morrison's exposed ribs with his right palm. The Wing Chun principle of simultaneous attack and defense manifested as pure martial arts poetry. Morrison staggered, more surprised than hurt, his fighting instincts finally recognizing that his opponent was operating on a completely different level of expertise. "Impossible," Morrison gasped, his MMA training providing no context for what he'd just experienced. 3 additional security guards arrived, drawn by their radios and the growing crowd. They saw their chief facing off against a man in a modest business suit and immediately moved to surround David, their training emphasizing overwhelming force over finesse. Frank struggled to his feet despite his earlier weakness, military instincts overriding physical limitations as he recognized the moment when retreat became impossible. "Get back, sir," David said to Frank without taking his eyes off the approaching guards. "This won't take long." What followed redefined the casino's understanding of violence. David moved like liquid lightning, his Wing Chun training expressing itself through techniques that seemed to bend physics. The first guard rushed him from the left. David's deflection sent the man crashing into a slot machine with enough force to trigger its alarm systems. The second guard attempted a tackle. David's footwork put him exactly where the guard couldn't reach him, while his elbow found the man's solar plexus with surgical precision. Morrison charged again, desperation overriding wisdom, his fists seeking to overwhelm David through sheer volume of attacks. David's response was a clinic in centerline theory. Every defense became an attack. Every attack created the setup for the next technique. Morrison's wild swings found nothing but air, while David's controlled strikes found every pressure point, nerve cluster, and structural weakness in the security chief's impressive physique. The third guard tried to blindside David from behind, only to discover that the quiet teacher's situational awareness encompassed the entire battle space. David's spinning heel kick connected with mathematical precision, sending the man sliding across the polished casino floor like a bowling ball seeking pins. 30 seconds after it began, the confrontation was over. Morrison and his 3 colleagues lay groaning on the casino floor, thoroughly defeated but not seriously injured. David had used only the force necessary to neutralize the threat, his control absolute, even in combat. Frank stared at David with complete recognition dawning in his military-trained eyes. I know who you are, Frank whispered, his voice filled with awe and understanding. But before David could respond, Victoria Sterling's voice cut through the electronic chaos of the casino like a blade. Police. I need police here immediately. We have a violent assault in progress. Frank lay crumpled against the slot machine where Morrison had shoved him, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead where he'd struck the chrome handle. The elderly veteran's military cap had fallen beside him, and David knelt to check his injuries while keeping Morrison in his peripheral vision. Are you hurt badly? David asked, his voice gentle despite the violence that had just erupted around them. Frank's blue eyes were clear and alert despite the blood. Nothing a tough old Marine can't handle. But you. He gripped David's arm with surprising strength. You're him, aren't you? Donnie Yen. David's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes, acknowledgement without confirmation. Around them, casino patrons held their phones high, recording what they thought was a simple security incident, but was actually the moment a legend revealed himself. Morrison groaned as he struggled to his feet, his ego more damaged than his body. The three other guards remained down, their moans creating a symphony of defeat that echoed through the gaming area. Slot machines continued their electronic songs, oblivious to the martial arts mastery that had just unfolded among them. Impossible, Morrison muttered, blood running from his nose. Nobody moves that fast. Nobody fights like that. Victoria Sterling appeared at the balcony overlooking the gaming floor, her phone already pressed to her ear. Her voice carried clearly across the casino's open architecture as she spoke to Las Vegas Metro Police. Yes, I need officers immediately at the Emerald Palace Casino. We have a violent individual who just assaulted 4 security guards. Asian male, approximately 55, wearing a business suit. He appears to have martial arts training and should be considered extremely dangerous. David helped Frank to his feet, the veteran's dignity returning with his standing posture. Around them, the crowd pressed closer, their phones capturing every moment of what would soon become viral footage. The cameras, Frank whispered urgently. They'll edit the footage to make you look like the aggressor. Sterling's done this before. Let them, David replied quietly, his calm unshaken by the approaching sirens. Truth has a way of revealing itself. But Frank's weathered face showed concern that went beyond immediate consequences. As police sirens wailed in the distance, he leaned close to David's ear. This isn't random. They've been targeting veterans for months. Pension fraud, rigged games, worse. My friend Walter died after they cleaned him out. I've been documenting everything, but I needed proof. His voice dropped to barely audible. They're going to try to silence both of us now. The Las Vegas Metro Police cruiser's red and blue lights painted the casino's gaudy interior in alternating waves of official authority. Detective Ray Castellanos stepped through the Emerald Palace's entrance with the weary professionalism of someone who'd seen every possible variation of casino violence during his 20-year career. Victoria Sterling intercepted him before he'd taken 10 steps. Her platinum hair perfectly arranged despite the chaos, her expensive suit broadcasting competence and respectability. She moved with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to managing law enforcement encounters to her advantage. Detective, thank goodness you're here, Sterling said, her voice carrying just the right mixture of relief and concern. We have a very dangerous situation. This man, she pointed toward David, who stood calmly beside Frank, attacked our security staff without provocation. For train guards, injured by one individual. Castellanos surveyed the scene with experienced eyes, noting the unconscious security personnel being tended by paramedics, the crowd of recording patrons, and the 2 men at the center of it all, one elderly and bloodied, the other impossibly calm for someone facing multiple assault charges. We have everything on camera, Sterling continued, producing a tablet displaying edited security footage. The video showed David's defensive actions, but carefully omitted Morrison's initial aggression toward Frank, the racist comments, and the physical assault on the elderly veteran. Sir, I'm going to need you to place your hands behind your back, Castellanos said to David, his tone professional but firm. Frank stepped forward despite his injuries. Officer, you don't understand. This man was defending me from assault. Your security guards attacked an elderly veteran, and this gentleman. Sir, I'm going to need you to step back and let me handle this, Castellanos interrupted his attention. Focused on Sterling's edited evidence, David offered no resistance as the handcuffs clicked into place. His expression remained serene, almost meditative, as if arrest was simply another form of training to be endured with patience and dignity. "You have the right to remain silent," Castellanos began, but Frank's urgent whisper cut through the Miranda warning. "Find me tomorrow at the VA hospital," Frank said quickly, his military bearing intact despite the blood on his forehead. "They've been stealing from veterans for months. This wasn't random. I've been documenting everything. What happened here tonight is just the beginning." David nodded almost imperceptibly, understanding that his intervention had exposed something far larger than a simple assault on an elderly man. The Clark County Detention Center's fluorescent lights had hummed their electronic lullaby through David's sleepless night, but his breathing remained controlled, meditative. At 8 a.m., he posted bail using money from his martial arts school's emergency fund, $3,000 that represented months of senior citizens' modest training fees. The irony wasn't lost on him that his students' dedication would pay for his freedom to seek justice for a fellow veteran. The local news van was already departing the detention center as David emerged, its crew having captured the morning story: "Martial arts instructor attacks casino security." The headline crawling across the van's LED display reduced 30 seconds of defensive mastery to sensationalized violence. Truth sacrificed to ratings as it always was. David's Honda started on the first turn, reliable as everything else in his carefully ordered life. The drive to the VA hospital took him through Las Vegas's morning transformation, neon signs surrendering to desert sunlight, the city's artificial glamour fading like makeup under harsh illumination. Henderson's suburban honesty felt like a sanctuary after the detention center's institutional despair. The VA hospital's parking lot told stories of service and sacrifice through license plates and bumper stickers. Units served, wars survived, brothers remembered. David found Frank in the outpatient clinic, his head wound now properly dressed, his military bearing restored by medical attention and morning clarity. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Frank said, his blue eyes sharp with intelligence that had nothing to do with the confused veteran act from the casino. "Sterling's people have been making calls. Your arrest is already being spun as unprovoked assault." Frank led David through corridors that smelled of antiseptic and old coffee, past wheelchairs and walking frames, the mobile evidence of bodies that had served their country and paid the price. They settled in a quiet corner of the cafeteria, surrounded by the low conversations of veterans sharing war stories and medical updates. 30 years military intelligence, Frank began, his voice dropping to the professional tone of someone accustomed to sensitive briefings. Korea, 2 tours in Vietnam, then counterintelligence until retirement. My friend Walter Kowalski, no relation, just coincidence, came to me 4 months ago. His pension was gone. $43,000, vanished through what the casino called legitimate gambling losses. Frank produced a manila folder from his jacket, its contents organized with military precision. Photographs, financial documents, witness statements, the methodical documentation of someone who understood how to build a case that would survive legal scrutiny. Walter was sharp as a tack until the day he died, Frank continued, his weathered hands steady as he arranged evidence on the cafeteria table. "Heart attack," they said. "Natural causes." But healthy 74-year-old men don't just drop dead 3 days after discovering their life savings have been stolen. David studied the photographs, elderly faces, military bearing evident even, in driver's license photos and obituary pictures. Names, dates, service records, financial statements showing systematic theft disguised as gambling losses. Emerald Palace targets veterans specifically, Frank explained, his intelligence training evident in his organized presentation. "They use our service records to access benefit information, skim pension payments through rigged games, and when we complain, they threaten us with charges of disturbing the peace or trespassing." The scope of the conspiracy emerged through Frank's documentation. 37 victims identified so far, losses totaling over $3 million, 7 suspicious deaths of veterans who tried to recover their stolen benefits. "But that's not the worst part," Frank said, his voice dropping even lower. "Victoria Sterling reports to Henry Wu, a triad boss who uses the casino to launder money from international operations. They're not just stealing from veterans. They're using our benefits to clean crime money through fake military charities. David absorbed the information with the focused intensity he brought to martial arts training, seeing patterns and connections. That impressed even Frank's trained analytical mind. "Why didn't you go to federal authorities?" David asked. That Frank's expression darkened. "I tried. FBI, Treasury, VA Inspector General. Sterling has contacts everywhere. Every investigation gets buried. Every complaint disappears. That's why I was playing confused old man, gathering evidence they didn't know I could understand. And now they know you're not confused. Now they know we're both threats that need eliminating." Frank's modest apartment occupied the ground floor of a Henderson Senior complex, its beige stucco exterior indistinguishable from thousands of similar units across the Las Vegas Valley. But inside, the living room resembled a military command center more than retirement housing. One entire wall had been transformed into an investigation matrix. Photographs connected by colored string, financial documents arranged in chronological order, organizational charts mapping relationships between Emerald Palace Casino and larger criminal enterprises. Frank's 30 years of intelligence training were evident in every methodical detail. "Jesus," David whispered, studying the scope of documentation. "How long have you been working on this?" "For months of active investigation," Frank replied, moving to the wall like a professor approaching a blackboard. "But the pattern goes back 18 months. Look here." He pointed to a cluster of death certificates. 7 veterans, all within weeks of losing substantial amounts at Emerald Palace. All ruled natural causes despite being in good health. David examined the documentation with the same focused intensity he brought to martial arts forms. Each photograph told a story of service and sacrifice: Korea veterans, Vietnam survivors, Gulf War participants, their military bearing evident even in driver's license photos and obituary pictures. "The operation is sophisticated," Frank continued, his intelligence analyst training evident in his organized presentation. "Sterling doesn't just run random scams. She uses government databases to identify veterans with substantial benefits, then targets them specifically through what appears to be legitimate gambling." The financial documents revealed the conspiracy's true scope. Bank statements showed pension deposits followed immediately by electronic transfers to casino accounts. Medical records had been accessed illegally to identify veterans with cognitive issues who could be easily confused and cheated. Death certificates clustered suspiciously around dates when victims had threatened legal action. "Victoria Sterling is the operational manager," Frank explained, pointing to surveillance photographs of the casino executive meeting with well-dressed Asian men in expensive restaurants. "But she reports to Henry Wu, who runs triad operations throughout Nevada and California. The casino is just one piece of his money laundering network." David studied a photograph showing Wu entering a downtown office building, his expensive suit, and calculated bearing suggesting someone accustomed to wielding serious power. Even in surveillance photos, Wu carried himself with the controlled precision of someone trained in martial arts, a detail that made David's assessment more complex. "Wu uses the casino to clean money from drug trafficking, human smuggling, and arms dealing," Frank continued. "Veteran benefits are attractive because they're substantial, regular, and the victims are often isolated. When they complain, who believes confused old men against respectable casino management?" The wall's organization revealed Frank's analytical brilliance. Red string connected victims to specific dealers who cheated them. Blue string showed financial flows from veteran accounts to triad-controlled businesses. Yellow string mapped the fake military charities we use to legitimize stolen money. "The fake charities are the masterstroke," Frank said, his admiration for the operation's sophistication evident despite his moral revulsion. "Wu creates organizations with patriotic names: Heroes Fund, Military Family Support, Veteran Emergency Relief. Donors think they're helping veterans while actually funding criminal operations." David found himself facing a conspiracy far more complex than simple casino fraud. This was systematic exploitation of America's military veterans by international criminals who understood how to manipulate both government systems and public sympathy. The most disturbing part, Frank said quietly, is how they eliminate witnesses. Walter wasn't the first veteran to die after threatening legal action. Look at these patterns. The death certificates showed a clear timeline. Veterans discovered the fraud, threatened exposure, then died within days of making complaints. Heart attacks, strokes, accidental falls, all plausibly natural for elderly men, all conveniently timed to silence inconvenient witnesses. I think they're murdering people, Frank said grimly, his military bearing unable to disguise the fear in his voice. And after last night, we're both on that list. David studied the wall of evidence, understanding that his intervention at the casino had exposed them to dangers far beyond simple assault charges. Then we'd better move fast, David said quietly, before they move on us. Frank poured coffee from a military-issue percolator that had probably seen 3 decades of service. The caffeine, as essential to planning as ammunition, was to combat. David studied the investigation wall while Frank outlined their next moves. With the methodical precision of someone who'd orchestrated complex operations in hostile territory. We need allies, Frank said, settling into a worn recliner that faced the evidence wall like a general's chair positioned for strategic overview. People with specific skills and personal stakes in bringing down this conspiracy. I've identified 3 potential recruits through my investigation, all veterans or family members who've been victimized. David nodded, recognizing the tactical wisdom. 2 men, regardless of their capabilities, couldn't dismantle an operation. This sophisticated without support from people who understood both the criminal system and legitimate investigative procedures. Betty Rodriguez lives 10 minutes from here, Frank continued, producing a manila file containing surveillance photographs and background information. 67 years old, retired IRS criminal investigation. 35-year career specializing in money laundering and organized crime financial networks. Lost her husband Roberto to a heart attack 6 weeks after Emerald Palace cleaned out his pension. The photographs showed a petite woman with steel gray hair and sharp brown eyes that suggested formidable intelligence. Even in casual surveillance shots, Betty carried herself with professional confidence, someone accustomed to authority and unimpressed by intimidation. She's been conducting her own investigation, Frank explained. Roberto died thinking he was a foolish old man who'd gambled away their retirement. Betty knows better. She found evidence of systematic fraud but couldn't get federal attention because Sterling's contacts buried her complaints. David studied Betty's background file, impressed by her credentials. IRS criminal investigation represented the elite of federal financial crime enforcement, agents who'd taken down major organized crime operations through patient forensic accounting rather than dramatic arrests. Next is Tommy Nakamura, Frank continued, producing another file. 72, former Army Corps of Engineers, 25 years specializing in demolitions and infrastructure. Japanese-American, 2nd generation, his family spent World War II in internment camps while he later served his country without bitterness. Tommy's photographs revealed a stocky man with powerful hands scarred by decades of working with explosives and heavy machinery. His weathered face showed the patience of someone who'd learned that precision with dangerous materials was literally a matter of life and death. Tommy's grandson lost his college fund to the casino's fraud, Frank explained. $43,000 that took the family 15 years to save. The boy was supposed to start engineering school next fall. Now he's working construction to earn tuition money while Sterling drives luxury cars bought with stolen veteran benefits. The personal stakes were evident in Tommy's background. A man who'd served his country despite its historical injustices, watching his family's next generation victimized by the same criminals his generation had fought to defeat. Finally, Margaret O'Brien, Frank said, producing the thickest file of all. 69, retired FBI cybercrimes analyst. 30-year career pioneering digital forensics techniques still used by federal agencies. Lost her brother Patrick's veteran benefits to Sterling's digital fraud schemes, identity theft, benefits skimming, medical record manipulation. Margaret's photographs showed a tall, thin woman with silver hair and sharp green eyes behind stylish glasses. Her background file read like a cyber warfare resume: computer intrusion investigations, digital evidence recovery, international cybercrime task forces. Margaret has been trying to hack Emerald Palace's systems for months, Frank explained. She's gotten close, but needs physical access to their main servers to gather the kind of evidence that will convince prosecutors. David studied the three files, recognizing that Frank had identified exactly the expertise they needed: financial investigation, tactical demolitions, and cyber warfare capabilities. When do we meet them? David asked. Tonight, Frank replied. Because Sterling's people are already looking for us, and time is running out for everyone. David's martial arts school had never hosted a meeting quite like this one. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across equipment that usually witnessed gentle forms and patient instruction, now illuminating faces marked by loss and determination. For justice, Frank had made the introductions with military efficiency, but the real bonding began when David started teaching. The first principle, David explained to his unlikely students, is that martial arts isn't about fighting. It's about awareness, positioning, and using your opponent's strength against them. Betty Rodriguez stood with her feet precisely positioned, her retirement from IRS criminal investigation evident in how she approached instruction like evidence analysis: methodical, thorough, skeptical until proven. At 67, her petite frame seemed unsuited for combat training, but her sharp brown eyes missed no detail of David's demonstrations. In Wing Chun, we don't meet force with force, David continued, guiding Betty's arm through a basic deflection. We redirect energy, find the center line, create opportunity from our opponent's aggression. Tommy Nakamura's stocky build and powerful hands made him a natural student, his demolitions background providing intuitive understanding of leverage and structural weakness. Years of working with explosives had taught him patience and precision, qualities that translated perfectly to martial arts fundamentals. This is like defusing bombs, Tommy observed, practicing the deflection technique with surprising grace. You don't force the mechanism. You understand how it works, then redirect its energy safely. Margaret O'Brien approached the training with analytical precision, her FBI cybercrimes background making her treat each technique like a software algorithm to be understood and optimized. Her tall frame moved awkwardly at first, but her intelligence quickly grasped the geometric principles underlying David's instruction. It's pattern recognition, Margaret said, working through a basic stance correction. Every attack follows predictable paths. Once you understand the patterns, you can anticipate and counter. Frank coordinated the evening's dual purpose, basic self-defense training combined with operational planning for their investigation. The elderly veterans moved through David's gentle instruction while simultaneously mapping their assault on Sterling's criminal empire. The casino's vulnerability is their confidence, Betty explained during a water break, her IRS experience evident in how she analyzed criminal operations. They've been successful so long, they've become careless with evidence. Financial crimes always leave paper trails. We just need to know where to look. David demonstrated escape techniques, while Betty outlined the money laundering operation structure. Tommy practiced balance and footwork while explaining how to disable security systems without triggering alarms. Margaret learned defensive positioning while describing the casino's computer network vulnerabilities. Physical access is the key, Margaret said, working through a basic defensive stance. I can hack their external systems, but their main servers are isolated from internet access. Someone needs to get me inside their computer room for about 20 minutes. The training session revealed each person's capabilities beyond their professional expertise. Betty's small size made her nearly invisible in crowds, perfect for surveillance. Tommy's mechanical background meant he could disable security cameras and electronic locks. Margaret's analytical mind grasped David's tactical principles with frightening speed. We're not just investigating anymore, Frank said as the evening wound down, his military bearing evident as he surveyed their makeshift team. After last night, Sterling knows we're threats. This becomes a war, and wars require soldiers who can protect each other. David watched his students clean equipment, with the same methodical care he'd taught them to apply to defensive techniques. These weren't typical martial arts students. They were veterans and professionals who'd spent careers serving others, now learning skills they'd need to survive what was coming. Same time tomorrow, David said quietly. We'll work on situational awareness and escape routes. Because once we move against Sterling's operation, there's no retreat. The four elderly students nodded grimly, understanding that their real education was just beginning. The transformation began with wardrobe. David stood before his bathroom mirror, adjusting a silk tie that cost more than his usual monthly clothing. Budget. The expensive Italian suit, borrowed from contacts whose existence he'd never explained to his students, fit him perfectly, tailored to suggest wealth without ostentation. His hair had been styled differently, his posture subtly altered to project the confident bearing of international money rather than humble teaching. "Mr. Kim from Hong Kong," he said quietly to his reflection, testing the identity that would carry him into Sterling's inner circle. The persona felt familiar, like clothing worn long ago but not forgotten. Another hint at the mysterious past David kept carefully hidden. Margaret O'Brien had worked through the night to establish his electronic identity, creating credit histories and bank records that would satisfy even sophisticated background checks. David's fictional Hong Kong businessman existed in databases across 3 continents, complete with gambling histories at exclusive casinos and investment portfolios substantial enough to attract VIP attention. Frank coordinated their insertion. From his apartment command center, now expanded with additional monitoring equipment and communication devices. Betty had positioned herself in the casino's shopping arcade, her appearance as a lonely widow browsing expensive boutiques, making her invisible to security while providing perfect surveillance positioning. Tommy worked from a rented van in the parking garage, his demolitions expertise repurposed for electronic surveillance. Listening devices, hidden cameras, and signal interceptors filled the vehicle's interior like a mobile intelligence station, his scarred hands surprisingly gentle as they positioned sensitive equipment. "Remember," Frank's voice crackled through David's nearly invisible earpiece. "Sterling's suspicious of everyone after last night. She'll be watching for any connection to our investigation." David entered the Emerald Palace through the VIP entrance, his expensive clothing and confident bearing immediately attracting the attention of casino hosts trained to identify high-value targets. The contrast with his previous visits was dramatic. Where the humble poker player had been tolerated, the wealthy businessman was courted. "Mr. Kim, welcome to Emerald Palace," purred Jessica Chun, a casino host whose own Chinese heritage made her Sterling's choice for handling Asian high rollers. "Ms. Sterling has prepared our finest accommodations for your visit." The VIP gaming salon occupied a private floor above the main casino, its subdued lighting and leather furniture creating an atmosphere of exclusive privilege. Here, the stakes began at levels that would bankrupt ordinary players, and the service included amenities that blurred the line between hospitality and seduction. That David's mathematical precision at the high-stakes tables immediately attracted attention. His betting patterns showed sophisticated understanding of probability theory, his reading of opponents demonstrated psychological insight, and his winnings accumulated with the steady inevitability of compound interest. "Impressive play," observed Marcus Webb, a regular whose pharmaceutical fortune funded his gambling habit. "Hong Kong business must be treating you well." "Business is always good when you understand patterns," David replied, his accent carefully modulated to suggest international education rather than immigrant origins. "Casinos, like markets, follow predictable mathematics." Victoria Sterling appeared at his table after 2 hours of steady winnings, her platinum hair and expensive suit creating the impression of corporate elegance. But David noticed details that revealed her true nature: the calculating way she assessed his clothing and jewelry, the subtle signals she gave to security personnel, the predatory patience of someone evaluating potential prey. "Mr. Kim, I'm Victoria Sterling, the casino manager," she said, extending a manicured hand that felt cold despite its perfect appearance. "I trust you're enjoying our hospitality." "Exceptional service," David replied, accepting her handshake, while noting the calluses that suggested she'd once worked with her hands before ascending to executive privilege. "Though I confess, I'm curious about your veteran services program. In Hong Kong, we have great respect for military traditions." Sterling's smile never wavered, but something shifted in her eyes, a flash of calculation that confirmed Frank's intelligence about her criminal specialization. "Perhaps we could discuss that over dinner," Sterling suggested. "I'd love to show you our private dining facilities." David's trap was set. The Emerald Palace's private dining room occupied a corner of the executive floor, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Las Vegas's sprawling desert metropolis. David sat across from Victoria Sterling, at a table that probably cost more than most people's cars, while hidden cameras in his clothing recorded every word of their conversation. "Our hero's weekend celebration is quite special," Sterling explained, her voice carrying practiced enthusiasm for a program that, unknown to legitimate observers, served as cover for her largest theft operations. "We honor military veterans with special gaming packages, exclusive tournaments, and charity fundraising events." David sipped wine that probably cost $500 per bottle, maintaining his wealthy businessman persona while Sterling unknowingly confessed to systematic fraud. Through his earpiece, Frank's voice provided real-time intelligence updates as the team monitored her revelations. "Charity work is particularly close to my heart," David said, his tone suggesting someone familiar with tax advantages rather than genuine philanthropy. "In Hong Kong, we found military charities provide excellent opportunities for community involvement." Sterling's eyes sharpened with interest, recognizing a potential co-conspirator in language that suggested shared understanding of charitable fraud possibilities. Her next words confirmed every suspicion Frank's investigation had developed. "We work with several military support organizations," Sterling continued, producing business cards for fake charities that existed only to launder triad money. "Heroes Fund, Military Family Support, Veteran Emergency Relief, all dedicated to helping those who served our country." David photographed each card with a device disguised as a business card holder, while Margaret's voice in his earpiece confirmed that the organizations were shells created to process stolen veteran benefits. The evidence was accumulating with every word Sterling spoke. "The tournament structure is quite sophisticated," Sterling explained, outlining a system that systematically cheated elderly veterans through rigged games and psychological manipulation. "We identify players with substantial retirement savings, then provide them with special attention designed to maximize their investment in our facilities." Through the restaurant's windows, David could see Tommy's surveillance van positioned in the parking structure below, its electronic ears capturing every conversation in the private dining room. Betty's position in the shopping arcade provided visual surveillance of security movements, while Margaret worked from Frank's apartment to trace the financial networks Sterling was describing. "Of course, some players become upset when they experience significant losses," Sterling continued, her casual tone masking the systematic destruction of lives she was describing. "We've developed effective methods for managing those situations. Sometimes older players become confused about their actual gameplay, and we help them understand what really happened." David's expression remained neutral, while Sterling essentially confessed to psychological manipulation of elderly veterans suffering from early-stage dementia. Her clinical description of exploiting cognitive decline revealed a level of callousness that made even David's legendary patience strain toward its limits. "Risk management is essential in any business," David observed, encouraging Sterling to reveal more of her methods. "Exactly," Sterling agreed, warming to what she believed was a kindred spirit in profitable exploitation. "We maintain detailed profiles on our veteran players, medical histories, family situations, financial resources. Knowledge is power, as they say, and power translates to profit." The dinner lasted 3 hours, during which Sterling unknowingly provided enough evidence to destroy her entire operation. She revealed the scope of veteran benefit theft, described her partnership with Henry Wu's money laundering network, and even hinted at methods used to silence witnesses who threatened legal action. "I think we could do excellent business together, Mr. Kim," Sterling concluded as they prepared to leave. "Perhaps you'd like to observe our hero's weekend celebration this Friday? See our methods in action." "I wouldn't miss it," David replied, shaking her hand while knowing that Heroes Weekend would indeed be memorable. Just not in the way Sterling anticipated as he left the casino. David's earpiece crackled with Frank's assessment. "We have everything we need. Time to end this." Frank's apartment had been transformed into a tactical operations center, maps and surveillance photos covering every surface, while electronic equipment hummed with the focused energy of impending action. The team gathered around his dining table, now serving as a strategy conference room where elderly veterans planned to take down an international criminal conspiracy. Heroes Weekend is perfect, Betty said, studying the casino's promotional materials with the analytical precision of her IRS background. Maximum veteran attendance, maximum media attention, maximum evidence of their crimes in action. When we expose them, the impact will be devastating. David had changed from his expensive businessman suit back to simple clothing, but his bearing retained the confident authority that came from successfully infiltrating Sterling's inner circle. The intelligence he'd gathered during dinner painted a complete picture of the criminal operation's scope and methods. Sterling expects Mr. Kim to observe their veteran exploitation firsthand, David reported. She's planning to demonstrate how they psychologically manipulate elderly players, thinking she's impressing a potential business partner. Margaret spread computer printouts across the table, financial records, organizational charts, communication intercepts that revealed the conspiracy's full structure. Her FBI cybercrimes expertise had turned Sterling's confidence into a tactical advantage. Every boastful revelation during dinner now transformed into prosecutable evidence. We coordinate our exposure for maximum impact, Frank outlined with military precision. David maintains his cover to document crimes in progress. Betty contacts federal prosecutors with organized evidence packages. Tommy secures media coverage to prevent the story from being buried. I coordinate with military authorities to ensure veteran victims receive justice. The plan required perfect timing and flawless execution. Too early, and Sterling's connections might suppress the evidence. Too late, and more veterans would be victimized while they prepared their revelation. What about Wu? David asked, recognizing that the triad boss represented a level of danger beyond Sterling's corporate corruption. Wu thinks he's insulated by layers of legitimate business, Frank replied grimly. But Margaret's traced money flows that connect him directly to veteran benefit theft. Federal prosecutors love cases that combine organized crime with crimes against military veterans. Tommy checked his equipment methodically, his demolitions background making him naturally cautious about operational details. Security will be heaviest during Heroes Weekend. If something goes wrong, we'll be trapped in a building full of Sterling's people. Then we don't let anything go wrong, David said quietly, his calm confidence reassuring the team of elderly veterans who were risking their lives for justice. Margaret's computer chimed with an incoming message, her expression darkening as she read the screen. Problem, she announced grimly. Sterling's monitoring our communications. She knows we're planning something. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Their perfect plan had just become a trap. Margaret's fingers flew across her keyboard with desperate urgency. Her FBI cybercrimes training engaged in digital warfare against Sterling's security systems. The apartment's electronic hum intensified as she activated countermeasures, but her expression showed the grim recognition of someone who discovered the enemy was better prepared than anticipated. They've been monitoring us for at least 12 hours, Margaret reported, her voice tight with professional frustration. Phone calls, emails, even our encrypted communications. Sterling's got military-grade surveillance equipment. Frank's weathered face showed no surprise, his intelligence background having taught him that successful operations always faced unexpected complications. But David noticed how his hands moved instinctively toward weapons that weren't there. Muscle memory from decades when discovery meant immediate danger. How much do they know? Betty asked, her IRS experience making her understand that blown investigations could become death sentences when organized crime was involved. Everything, Margaret replied grimly. Our identities, our evidence, our plans for Heroes Weekend. Worse, they know about David's Mr. Kim identity. The implications cascaded through the room like falling dominoes. Sterling wasn't just aware of their investigation. She was actively countering it with resources that suggested connections far beyond local casino management. David's successful infiltration had been allowed, possibly encouraged, drawing him deeper into a trap designed to eliminate all threats simultaneously. Tommy's scarred hands worked methodically through his equipment, his demolitions expertise making him naturally paranoid about surprises. If they know we're coming, why haven't they moved against us already? Because they want us all together, Frank said quietly, his military mind recognizing the tactical situation. Heroes Weekend isn't just their biggest criminal operation. It's their solution to the witness problem. For dead seniors, killed tragically during a terrorist attack on a veteran celebration. Very convenient. David stood at the apartment's window, studying the parking lot with eyes trained to notice surveillance. Two vehicles that hadn't been there that morning, positioned for optimal observation. Professional watchers, waiting for orders that would probably come during Heroes Weekend's chaos. "We have two choices," David said, turning back to the team. "Abort the operation and hope Sterling's people let us disappear quietly, or proceed knowing it's a trap and turn that against them." "Some choice," Betty muttered. But her expression showed the determination that had made her a legendary federal investigator. Frank's apartment fell silent, except for Margaret's typing as she worked to maintain their communications security. Outside, Las Vegas continued its daily transformation from desert town to neon carnival, unaware that elderly veterans were planning to risk their lives exposing crimes against America's heroes. "We go forward," Frank announced with military finality. "But now we're not just investigators. We're targets who need to survive what's coming." David nodded, understanding that Heroes Weekend would indeed be unforgettable, just not for the reasons any of them had originally planned. Heroes Weekend arrived with all the patriotic pageantry Sterling could orchestrate, American flags draped throughout the Emerald Palace, while military memorabilia transformed the casino into a shrine to service and sacrifice. The irony was sickening. Hundreds of elderly veterans streaming through doors decorated to honor them, while the very people managing their celebration planned to rob them blind. David entered as Mr. Kim for what would be his final performance. The expensive suit feeling like armor as he moved through a casino that had become a battlefield disguised as a celebration. His earpiece crackled with final communications from his team, each member positioned according to plans they all knew had been compromised. "Perimeter security is double normal," Tommy reported from his surveillance van, his demolitions expertise, making him naturally observant of defensive preparations. "They're ready for something, but trying to appear normal for the veteran families." Betty had positioned herself near the casino's main entrance, her appearance as a proud military widow, making her invisible among the hundreds of similar visitors. Her sharp eyes cataloged security personnel, noting faces that didn't match the celebration's supposed purpose. Professional muscle trying to blend with genuine casino staff. Margaret worked from Frank's apartment, her FBI cybercrimes background, engaged in digital warfare against Sterling's increasingly sophisticated countermeasures. Every keystroke was a battle for information advantage, her screens displaying the electronic chess match between competing intelligence operations. David approached the high-stakes poker tournament that would serve as his cover, but the familiar comfort of mathematical precision felt different now. Every calculation carried life-or-death stakes. Every opponent assessment included evaluation of potential threats beyond simple gambling competence. The tournament's participants included legitimate wealthy players alongside what David recognized as planted professionals, Sterling's people positioned to ensure specific outcomes while maintaining the appearance of fair competition. His trained eyes cataloged potential weapons, escape routes, and tactical advantages while his hands dealt with cards and chips. "Mr. Kim, so pleased you could join us." Victoria Sterling appeared beside his table, her smile as artificial as the casino's patriotic decorations. "I trust you're ready for an educational weekend." "Education is always valuable," David replied, noting how Sterling's positioning blocked his most direct exit route. "Though I confess, I'm curious to observe your veteran services in action." Sterling's expression showed predatory satisfaction, someone who believed her prey was walking willingly into a perfectly constructed trap. What she couldn't see was David's peripheral awareness of his team's positions, his tactical assessment of the casino's layout, and his preparation for violence that would make her previous encounters with confused old men seem like children's games. Frank entered the casino through the veteran group entrance, his military bearing authentic among hundreds of similar elderly men wearing service caps and medals earned through genuine sacrifice. But unlike the other veterans, Frank carried concealed communication equipment and weapons obtained through contacts Sterling's intelligence hadn't identified. The tournament progressed with artificial normalcy. David's mathematical precision, winning steadily while Sterling's planted professionals maintained their assigned positions. But beneath the surface of gambling entertainment, both sides prepared for confrontation that would determine whether Sterling's criminal empire survived or crumbled. "Gentlemen, ladies," Sterling announced to the tournament participants, her voice carrying across the VIP gaming area through wireless microphone systems. "We have special activities planned for our veteran guests today. Educational demonstrations of casino operations, behind-the-scenes tours, and private meetings with our management team." David recognized the announcement as the beginning of Sterling's trap, her educational demonstrations designed to eliminate witnesses while appearing to honor them. Through his earpiece, Frank's voice carried military urgency. "They're moving. Security teams heading for predetermined positions. Whatever happens next, there's no retreat." David's hands remained steady on his cards while his mind calculated angles, distances, and timing for what would either be their greatest victory or their final battle. Heroes Weekend was about to live up to its name. The elevator descended with mechanical precision toward the casino's basement levels, carrying David deeper into what he knew was Sterling's carefully constructed trap. His Mr. Kim persona remained intact, but his peripheral awareness cataloged every detail: emergency exits, security camera positions, and the subtle tensing of muscles that indicated his escorts were preparing for violence. Morrison stood beside him, the security chief's bruises from their previous encounter barely concealed by makeup and professional lighting. His gray eyes held the cold satisfaction of someone anticipating revenge, though his posture suggested nervous awareness that his opponent had already proven formidable. "Mr. Wu is very interested in meeting you," Morrison said, his voice carrying false friendliness that fooled no one. "He appreciates businessmen who understand opportunity when they see it." The basement level revealed the casino's true nature: sterile. Corridors lined with security offices, money-counting rooms, and holding areas designed for people who asked too many questions. David noted camera positions, door locks, and ventilation systems with the automatic assessment of someone trained in tactical environments. Frank waited in the central security office, secured to a metal chair with zip-tie restraints that showed professional application. His face bore evidence of interrogation: split lip, blackened eye, abrasions that suggested systematic rather than random violence. But his military bearing remained intact, blue eyes alert and defiant despite obvious pain. "Your friend has been asking inconvenient questions," Sterling explained as she entered the room, her executive composure intact despite supervising what was clearly a torture session. "About deceased veterans, missing pension funds, and certain business arrangements that require discretion." David maintained his businessman facade while calculating angles, distances, and timing. The room contained 6 armed men plus Sterling and Morrison, odds that would challenge even his capabilities, but not impossible for someone with his particular background and training. Henry Wu emerged from the shadows like a predator, revealing himself at the moment of kill. At 58, he moved with the controlled precision of traditional martial arts training, his expensive suit unable to conceal the coiled strength beneath. His sharp black eyes assessed David with the recognition of one master evaluating another. "Donnie Yen," Wu said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. "Did you think we wouldn't discover your true identity? Did you believe we would be fooled by suits and accents and fictional businessmen?" The pretense was over. David's posture shifted subtly, the businessman disappearing as the martial arts legend emerged. His breathing remained controlled, but his stance balanced, ready for explosive movement in any direction. "Mr. Chun has been documenting our operations with remarkable thoroughness," Sterling added, producing electronic devices she'd recovered from David's clothing. Hidden cameras, recording equipment, transmission devices. Quite sophisticated for a humble martial arts instructor. Morrison stepped closer, his confidence bolstered by overwhelming numbers and his employer's presence. "Remember me, Jackie Chan. Still think you're fast enough to handle real fighters." Frank struggled against his restraints, military pride refusing to let him remain passive while someone defended his honor. "David, they know about the others. Betty, Tommy, Margaret, they're walking into." Morrison's backhand silenced Frank, the casual violence revealing his enjoyment of inflicting pain on helpless victims. The blow opened the cut on Frank's lip, blood spattering across his military veteran cap that had witnessed more honor than Morrison would ever understand. David's expression never changed, but something shifted in the room's atmosphere. A sense of approaching storm that made even Wu's professional killers unconsciously step backward. "You shouldn't have hit him," David said quietly, his voice carrying the finality of a death sentence pronounced with absolute certainty. Wu smiled, recognizing the moment when negotiation ended and violence began. "Kill them both," Wu commanded, his martial arts training making him confident that David's legendary reputation meant nothing against overwhelming firepower. The basement security office erupted into controlled chaos as David demonstrated why legends never truly fade. The basement security office became a masterclass in Wing Chun efficiency as David moved like water transformed into lightning. His first technique neutralized Morrison's attempted bear hug, David's palm strike, to the security chief's solar plexus, folding the larger man like origami while simultaneously positioning David for his next attack. The confined space that Wu had chosen for intimidation became David's tactical advantage. Wing Chun's close-quarters principles transformed the narrow room into a perfect demonstration of centerline theory and simultaneous attack-defense concepts. Every movement served multiple purposes. Each defense created offensive opportunity. Each strike established position for the next technique. That Morrison's first gunman rushed from David's left, his weapon drawn but useless at close range. David's intercepting hand redirected the gun barrel while his elbow found the man's temple with surgical precision. The gunman dropped unconscious while his weapon skittered across polished concrete, creating chaos that worked entirely in David's favor. "Impossible," Wu whispered, his traditional martial arts background providing context for what he was witnessing: perfection in motion, decades of training expressing itself through techniques that seemed to bend physics. Two more gunmen converged simultaneously, their coordination suggesting professional military training corrupted by criminal employment. David's response demonstrated why Wing Chun emphasized economy of motion. His turning stance put both attackers in each other's line of fire while his hands deflected their weapons into collision with devastating results. Sterling retreated toward the security office's reinforced door, her executive composure finally cracking as she witnessed her professional killers being systematically dismantled by a single opponent who moved like poetry written in violence. Her manicured fingers fumbled with door locks while behind her, David continued his demonstration of legendary skill. Frank watched with professional appreciation, his military background recognizing tactical mastery when he saw it. Despite his restraints and injuries, the elderly veteran began working on his zip-tie bonds, knowing that backup was always valuable even when the primary operator seemed invincible. Morrison recovered enough to attempt another assault, his MMA training providing muscle memory despite his body's protest against further punishment. His tackle would have worked against ordinary opponents, but David wasn't constrained by ordinary limitations. The Wing Chun principle of borrowed force turned Morrison's momentum into a throwing technique that sent the security chief crashing into his own surveillance equipment. That Wu finally moved, his traditional kung fu background making him David's most dangerous opponent despite the age difference. Their clash represented more than personal combat. It was philosophical warfare between martial arts used for protection versus martial arts corrupted for predation. The fight between masters filled the security office with the sound of techniques refined through decades of dedication. Wu's tiger-style attacks met David's Wing Chun defenses in combinations that showcased both men's extraordinary capabilities. But Wu's criminal lifestyle had softened edges that David's disciplined teaching had kept razor-sharp. David's chain punches, Wing Chun's signature technique, penetrated Wu's defenses with mathematical precision, each strike building on the previous impact to create cumulative damage that overwhelmed the crime boss's considerable skills. Wu's expensive suit tore as he struggled against techniques that treated his body like a physics problem to be solved through applied leverage. Sterling's door lock finally yielded, but her escape route led directly into the hallway where David's students had positioned themselves according to plans Wu's intelligence had never discovered. Betty's IRS investigative skills had identified service corridors that security cameras couldn't monitor. Tommy's demolitions expertise had disabled electronic locks throughout the basement level. Margaret's cyber warfare capabilities had given them complete control of the casino's communication systems, isolating Wu's people from reinforcements while allowing David's team to coordinate their assault on Sterling's criminal empire. The trap Wu had constructed became his own destruction as elderly veterans proved that true strength came from character rather than criminal connections. Frank smiled through his split lip as his zip tie restraints finally parted. Need help, son? David helped Frank to his feet, the elderly veteran's military bearing returning despite his injuries. Around them, Wu's security team lay groaning in various states of unconsciousness, their expensive weapons useless against an opponent who had turned their own tactical space into a demonstration of martial arts mastery. "Are you hurt badly?" David asked, his voice gentle despite the violence that had just erupted around them. Frank grinned through his split lip, his blue eyes bright with the satisfaction of a soldier who'd witnessed superior tactics triumph over overwhelming odds. Nothing a tough old Marine can't handle. But Wu and Sterling aren't finished yet. They've got backup coming, and they'll burn this whole building down before they let us walk out with evidence. David's earpiece crackled with urgent communications from his team positioned throughout the casino. Betty's voice carried the authority of her IRS background as she reported from the main gaming floor. Security's mobilizing. They're evacuating VIP areas and locking down the building. Whatever you did down there got their attention. Tommy's demolitions expertise proved invaluable as he guided them through basement corridors that avoided primary security routes. His scarred hands worked quickly on electronic locks that Margaret had compromised through cyber warfare, creating escape paths that Wu's people couldn't monitor or predict. Margaret's got control of their communication systems, Tommy reported through David's earpiece. But she says Wu's got military-grade backup systems we haven't penetrated yet. They can still coordinate, just not as efficiently. David and Frank moved through the casino's service corridors with practiced stealth, David's martial arts training combining with Frank's intelligence background to navigate the building like ghosts. Behind them, sirens wailed as Wu's remaining security forces tried to establish control over a situation that had moved far beyond their capabilities. The casino's main floor had transformed from patriotic celebration into controlled chaos. Veterans and their families were being evacuated through emergency exits, while security personnel tried to maintain order without revealing the criminal conspiracy that had been exposed in the basement levels. There, Frank pointed toward a service elevator that would take them to the executive floors where Sterling had retreated with Wu's most dangerous operatives. They'll make their last stand in the penthouse. It's got independent communications, escape routes, and enough firepower to hold off a small army. David studied the elevator access, his tactical mind calculating risks and opportunities. The penthouse represented Sterling's final sanctuary, but it also meant they would be cornered with nowhere to retreat. For criminals accustomed to intimidation and corruption, direct confrontation with someone of David's capabilities was their worst nightmare. "The evidence," Frank said, producing a small recording device that had survived Morrison's search. "Everything Wu and Sterling said is on here. Even if they kill us, this proves the conspiracy extends beyond simple casino fraud to international money laundering and systematic veteran exploitation." Margaret's voice crackled through David's earpiece with urgent intelligence. "Federal agents are en route." Betty's contacts came through. "But Wu's people are jamming emergency communications. The feds don't know about the penthouse standoff." The elevator arrived with mechanical precision, its polished interior reflecting two men who had already survived more than Sterling's carefully constructed trap was supposed to allow. David checked his appearance in the mirrored walls, noting torn clothing and minor injuries that testified to basement combat. But finding his balance and focus intact, Frank adjusted his veteran cap, the simple gesture restoring dignity that Morrison's violence had tried to destroy. Despite his injuries, the elderly Marine stood ready for whatever final confrontation awaited in the penthouse levels above. "You sure you're up for this?" David asked, recognizing that Frank's courage was absolute, but his physical limitations were real. "Son," Frank replied with military pride, I've been waiting 78 years to see real justice delivered to people who prey on veterans. I wouldn't miss this for the world. The elevator doors closed, carrying them towards Sterling's final sanctuary and the ultimate test of whether legends could triumph over institutional corruption. The penthouse elevator opened onto a panoramic view of Las Vegas that stretched from the desert mountains to the neon-soaked strip, the city's artificial brilliance creating a backdrop for what would determine whether justice or corruption prevailed. Floor-to-ceiling windows surrounded a luxury office that reflected Sterling's taste for expensive displays of power, but David's trained eyes immediately cataloged tactical elements, cover positions, sight lines, and the glass barriers that could become weapons or obstacles. Victoria Sterling stood behind an antique mahogany desk that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries, her platinum hair perfectly styled despite the chaos erupting throughout her criminal empire. Her cold blue eyes held the calculating desperation of someone who'd built everything on systematic exploitation and now faced the collapse of her carefully constructed world. Henry Wu positioned himself near the western windows, his traditional martial arts stance suggesting someone prepared for combat despite being cornered 50 floors above the desert floor. At 58, he moved with the controlled precision of decades spent perfecting techniques that had been corrupted from protective arts into instruments of predation. 6 bodyguards formed a semicircle around the penthouse's central area, their positioning professional but their expressions showing the nervous tension of men who'd heard about David's basement demonstration. These weren't casino security guards. They were Wu's personal killers, imported from Hong Kong specifically for situations that required absolute violence. Donnie Yen, Wu said quietly, his voice carrying the respect one master should show another. Despite their philosophical opposition, I trained at the same schools, studied under masters who spoke your name with reverence. It saddens me that we must meet as enemies. David stepped from the elevator with Frank beside him, both men moving with the dignity of people who'd accepted that survival was less important than justice. The elderly veteran's military bearing remained intact despite his injuries, his presence serving as a reminder of the countless heroes Wu and Sterling had victimized through their criminal conspiracy. "We don't have to be enemies," David replied, his voice carrying the patience that had made him a legendary teacher as well as fighter. "You can choose to stop harming people who serve their country. You can return the money stolen from veterans. You can surrender to federal authorities and accept consequences for your choices." Sterling laughed, the sound as artificial as everything else about her carefully constructed persona. "Surrender? We have 6 professional killers, defensive positions, and escape routes you can't possibly know about. You have an injured old man, and whatever reputation preceded you here." Wu's expression showed genuine regret, not for his crimes, but for the necessity of destroying someone whose martial arts mastery he genuinely respected. His traditional training had taught him honor and protection, values he'd systematically corrupted for profit but never entirely forgotten. "I studied your tournament footage," Wu admitted, settling into a classical kung fu stance that showcased decades of dedicated training. Wing Chun perfected through scientific application, traditional forms enhanced by modern understanding. "You represent everything martial arts should aspire to achieve. Then you understand why I can't let you continue hurting innocent people," David said, his own stance shifting to the balanced readiness that had made Wing Chun legendary for its efficiency and precision. Frank moved toward the penthouse's eastern wall, his military experience recognizing that the coming battle would require all available tactical advantages. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Las Vegas sparkled below them like a galaxy of possibilities, unaware that the fate of countless veterans was being decided in the luxury office above the desert. "Last chance," Sterling announced, her voice carrying across the penthouse through wireless microphone systems. "Kill them both, and we disappear forever. Let them live, and we all spend the rest of our lives in federal prison." Wu's bodyguards drew their weapons with professional precision, but David had already begun moving, his legendary speed making their careful positioning irrelevant. The penthouse erupted into controlled violence as 2 masters clashed while Las Vegas glittered 50 floors below. The penthouse battle raged with the fury of competing philosophies made manifest through martial arts mastery. David's Wing Chun flowed like water finding its path, each technique serving multiple purposes as he engaged Wu's bodyguards while simultaneously positioning himself for the inevitable confrontation with their master, Wu's six killers moved with professional coordination, their Hong Kong training evident in how they used the penthouse's luxury furniture and architectural features as tactical advantages. But David's legendary reputation existed because he'd faced similar odds countless times, his experience transforming their careful planning into academic exercises in applied physics. The first bodyguard rushed from David's left, his knife seeking the center line that Wing Chun principles protected above all else. David's deflection sent the blade harmlessly wide, while his simultaneous strike collapsed the man's attack structure, sending him crashing through Sterling's antique coffee table with enough force to trigger the building's security alarms. Wu watched with professional appreciation as David systematically dismantled his most trusted operatives, each technique demonstrating why Wing Chun had survived centuries of combat evolution. The crime boss's respect for David's abilities warred with his understanding that losing this battle meant the destruction of everything he'd built through decades of criminal enterprise. Frank positioned himself behind Sterling's massive desk, his military experience making him valuable as tactical observer even if his physical capabilities were limited by age and injury. The elderly veteran's sharp eyes cataloged weapon positions and escape routes while his hands worked to activate the recording equipment that would document Wu's final confessions. Magnificent, Wu breathed as David's chain punches penetrated another bodyguard's defenses with mathematical precision. You fight like the masters who trained us both. Pure technique expressing pure principle. Sterling retreated toward the penthouse's emergency exit, her executive composure finally shattered by witnessing her carefully constructed defenses crumble before a single opponent. Her manicured fingers fumbled with electronic locks while behind her. David continued his demonstration of why legends endured across generations. Two bodyguards attempted coordinated attacks from opposite directions, their timing suggesting extensive tactical training. David's response showcased Wing Chun's core principle, economy of motion that made every movement serve multiple purposes. His turning stance put both attackers in collision courses while his hands guided their momentum into devastating impacts with the penthouse's marble columns that Wu finally engaged directly, his traditional tiger style representing decades of study under masters who demanded perfection. The clash between masters filled the penthouse with the sounds of techniques refined through lifetimes of dedication, each strike and counterstrike demonstrating why martial arts transcended simple violence to become applied philosophy. But Wu's criminal lifestyle had corrupted more than his moral principles. It had softened the discipline that martial arts mastery required. His techniques retained their form but lacked the spiritual foundation that gave David's movements their devastating precision. David's centerline attacks found gaps in Wu's defenses that represented philosophical as well as technical weaknesses. Each Wing Chun technique demonstrated how protective arts naturally overcame predatory applications, principle triumphing over corruption through pure expression of martial truth. Sterling's emergency exit finally yielded, but her escape route led directly into the hallway where federal agents had positioned themselves according to intelligence Betty had provided through her law enforcement contacts. The IRS investigators' network had proven more extensive than Sterling's corruption, could anticipate or counter that Wu staggered under David's relentless chain punches, his expensive suit torn and his breathing labored. Around them, his bodyguards lay unconscious among the wreckage of Sterling's luxury office, their professional reputations shattered by a single opponent who'd made their expertise appear amateur. Frank activated his recording equipment as Wu struggled to maintain his defensive posture. "It's over," Frank announced with military finality. "Federal agents are in the building. Your money laundering network is exposed. The veteran victims will receive justice." Wu's expression showed the defeat of someone who'd built everything on others' suffering and now faced the consequences of systematic evil. Dawn broke over Las Vegas with the harsh clarity that revealed truth beneath the city's artificial glamour. Federal agents swarming through the Emerald Palace Casino like antibodies attacking an infection. Detective Ray Castellanos stood in the penthouse wreckage, his 20-year career providing context for the systematic criminal enterprise that David's team had exposed with methodical precision. Jesus Christ, Castellanos muttered, surveying the evidence that Betty Rodriguez had organized with her legendary IRS thoroughness. Financial documents, recorded confessions, digital evidence of money laundering operations that stretched across 3 continents. The scope of veteran exploitation was staggering even by Las Vegas standards. Victoria Sterling sat in federal custody, her platinum hair disheveled and her executive composure completely shattered. The woman who'd built her fortune on systematic exploitation of military heroes now faced charges that would ensure she spent the rest of her life in federal prison, assuming she survived long enough to stand trial. Henry Wu occupied a separate holding area, his traditional martial arts bearing intact despite his obvious defeat. Federal prosecutors were already preparing cases that would dismantle his entire triad network, using veteran benefit theft as the foundation for charges that included international money laundering, organized crime conspiracy, and multiple homicides, disguised as natural deaths. The evidence is overwhelming, announced FBI Special Agent Sarah Martinez, her cybercrimes expertise making her appreciation for Margaret's investigative work both professional and personal. We've recovered over $3 million in stolen veteran benefits, identified 47 victims, and documented systematic fraud dating back 18 months. David stood at the penthouse windows, watching Las Vegas transform from neon carnival back to desert city as morning light revealed the honest landscape beneath artificial glamour. His modest clothing had been restored after his businessman disguise was no longer necessary, but his bearing retained the quiet authority that came from knowing justice had been served. Frank emerged from medical evaluation with his injuries properly treated, his military cap restored to its proper position despite the previous night's violence. The elderly Marine's blue eyes showed satisfaction that went beyond personal vindication. This was about protecting future veterans from predators who viewed military service as exploitable weakness. The fake charities were the masterstroke. Betty explained to federal prosecutors, her IRS background making her the perfect witness to describe financial crimes that had fooled even sophisticated oversight agencies. Heroes Fund, Military Family Support, Veteran Emergency Relief, all created to launder triad money while appearing to help the same veterans they were actually robbing. Tommy's demolitions expertise had proven invaluable in documenting Sterling's security systems and escape routes, his scarred hands now providing detailed technical evidence that would ensure no aspect of the criminal conspiracy escaped federal prosecution. His grandson would attend engineering school as planned, the college fund restored through recovered stolen assets Margaret's cyber warfare capabilities had given federal investigators complete access to Wu's digital networks. Her FBI training making her uniquely qualified to trace money flows that connected Las Vegas casino fraud to international organized crime operations across 3 continents. Detective Castellanos approached David with visible embarrassment, his professional integrity demanding acknowledgement of previous mistakes. Mr. Chun, I owe you an apology. The security footage we initially reviewed had been edited to make you appear to be the aggressor. The complete recordings show clearly that you were defending Mr. Kowalski from assault. All charges against you are dropped, obviously. Castellanos continued. In fact, the governor wants to present you with a civilian commendation for your role in exposing this conspiracy. Without your intervention, dozens more veterans would have been victimized. David accepted the apology with the same quiet dignity he brought to everything else, his expression showing no satisfaction in vindication, only relief that justice had prevailed over institutional corruption. I was just doing what anyone should do for a veteran, David replied simply. But Frank knew better, and his weathered face showed the respect one warrior gives another after witnessing legendary skill applied for the highest principles. 1 month after Heroes Weekend, David adjusted the wooden dummy in his martial arts school as morning sunlight streamed through windows that now bore a small bronze plaque dedicated to America's veterans, heroes yesterday, today, and tomorrow. The modest storefront had been transformed not by renovation, but by purpose. What had once been a simple Wing Chun school had become a community center where veterans found strength, dignity, and family. Frank arrived first, as he had every morning since his discharge from the hospital, his military bearing fully restored and his blue eyes bright with renewed purpose. The elderly Marine had become David's informal assistant instructor, his intelligence background perfect for teaching situational awareness, while his natural leadership drew other veterans into their growing community. "Morning, Sifu," Frank said, using the respectful title that had spread naturally among their extended family of students. Betty's bringing coffee, and Tommy promised to show the new students his lockpicking techniques. The school's enrollment had quadrupled since the Emerald Palace investigation became national news. Veterans from across Nevada sought out the quiet teacher who'd risked everything to protect one of their own, finding in David's patient instruction something they'd lost in civilian life: respect, purpose, and brotherhood. Betty Rodriguez entered. With her customary punctuality, the former IRS investigator now volunteering her financial expertise to help elderly veterans protect themselves from future predators. Her sharp brown eyes had softened with the satisfaction of someone who'd found justice after years of bureaucratic frustration. Tommy Nakamura followed with Margaret O'Brien, the former demolitions expert and FBI analyst, having discovered unexpected friendship through their shared adventure. Tommy's scarred hands now taught basic security measures while Margaret provided computer literacy classes, both finding new purpose in protecting their community. David began his morning class with 8 original students who'd grown to 47. Their ages ranging from Korean War veterans in their 80s to younger military families seeking the stability that traditional martial arts provided. Helen Martinez still attended every class, but now her grandson Bobby joined her, the bullying problem solved through confidence rather than violence. The wooden dummy received its daily greeting as David prepared for another day of teaching. But now his simple touch carried the weight of legend acknowledged. His students knew they were learning from someone whose skills had saved lives and delivered justice, which made them treasure each lesson even more. Through the windows, Henderson's suburban honesty continued its daily routine, but now it sheltered something special, a place where heroes learned they were still strong, still valuable, still capable of extraordinary things when their community needed protection. That a news report played quietly on the small television. Rex Morrison, now in minimum security federal prison, watched coverage of David receiving the Governor's Medal of Valor. The former security chief finally understood he hadn't just lost to a martial artist, but to a living legend who'd chosen humility over fame, service over glory, and justice over revenge. David smiled quietly and began teaching his first class of the day, ready to show another group of heroes that true strength comes from protecting others. If you like the story, please watch another story on our channel and subscribe to the channel.